I just wanted to take a moment to personally thank you for all the kind messages of encouragement and for being patient with me as I recovered from surgery." Queen Camilla's piercing and distinctly icy voice broke Prince George's attempt at enjoying a peaceful moment in the royal grounds. According to eyewitnesses, his grin disappeared before their very eyes. Unfortunately, Catherine did not see her son's quivering hands until after it was too late. Her words, if any, had an impact. It was more than a casual comment, though. It marked a turning point. What was it that the Queen Consort said that finally broke Catherine? Keep on reading, because the events that followed sent shockwaves through the palace. On high alert, Catherine's instincts. The plan all along had been for the spring gathering to be a lovely, unremarkable, well-mannered affair. St. James's Palace, as is typical for royal events with a charitable purpose, was decked out to dazzle. In the dim light, the crystal glasses shimmered. The elegant reception hall was alive with the sound of well-mannered talk as the tulips stood in perfect formation. Despite her best efforts to politely meet school visitors and nod at pastors, Catherine's mind kept returning to her kid. As was his wont, George began the day with relative silence. There were no outbursts of emotion other than an uncomfortable quiet. Over breakfast, he fiddled with his plate more than he really consumed. Anxiety didn't grip him. Though he seldom was in the moments leading up to public engagements, there had been an absence of his customary radiance. After helping him correct his collar and blaming it on anxiety, Catherine sent him out to the event with his siblings for a brief roll. Handshakes, grins, and photos were all that was required before they were led back to the drawing room, nothing too formal. The young royals needed to know their place in society from a young age, the king had emphasized. Catherine had given her assent, but only under close watch. Just like before, everything had been meticulously timed. 2 young heirs from European royal houses were accompanied by George. Just a casual conversation to demonstrate solidarity. As he spoke about his passion for history, Catherine watched from the doorway. He had remained calm, attentive, and nearly his regular self. Up until Camilla walked into the room, though. It was unremarkable. Keep your voice down. Absent any abrupt movements, merely a look at George. For most people, that would have been an insignificant moment, but Catherine saw it clearly. As her son sat up taller without raising an eyebrow, she noticed his shoulders tensing up. There had been a shift. As she went around the event, shaking hands and expressing gratitude to donors, she attempted to brush it off. She had honed her instincts over her years spent inside the palace. Subtle remarks masquerading as kind corrections may sting more than anybody would admit, as Catherine had witnessed previously. And Camilla, who looked composed in her pale blue coat dress at all times, was known for smiling while speaking the unsayable. A glimmer of movement caught Catherine's attention as she made her way along the west hallway. With his head bowed, shoulders tense, and lips pursed into a pale, anxious line, George stood alone. There were no outbursts of emotion, instead, his tiny form betrayed a subtle pain. As the world around Catherine grew silent, her steps became clumsier. Her son, the future monarch, appeared as if he were a youngster attempting to vanish into thin air. There was an air of mystery about what had just transpired, and someone would have to take the blame. And then it happened. As Catherine retreated from the west corridor, her mind still processing the expression on her son's face, she caught sight of George once more. He stood completely alone by the stone column outside the music room, his posture reserved and his hands deep in his pockets. He remained still. He was staring straight ahead. He remained still. That was out of the ordinary for George. That kind of stillness didn't happen by chance for a kid that is so inquisitive and charming. Even though he first ignored her, she could tell that his shoulders had tensed up in the same manner they had when Camilla had walked in. The delicate track was followed by Catherine. As Camilla vanished around the bend, her gaze shifted to the arched corridor. Calmly sipping water as if nothing had transpired, she exudes an air of almost excessive composure. Uncertainty turned into certainty at that moment. That room had seen an event. Catherine could now see the proof in George down to the smallest detail. His normally composed demeanor, which garnered him compliments from both school personnel and palace aides, had transformed into something else entirely. He was behaving calmly. He was drawing back, concealing something. Symptoms had begun that very morning. He was noticeably absent throughout breakfast. He barely touched his toast, made no jokes with Charlotte, and lacked the normal curiosity to ask William questions. He had seemed hollow and unconvinced in his just tired response when she softly inquired whether he was okay. At that point, she refrained from interfering. The automobile, however, was even quieter. The lively twins, Charlotte and Louis, had occupied themselves with laughing and nursery rhymes. But George kept staring out the window. His gaze fixated on the roofs, as if he were attempting to disappear into them. In the rearview mirror, Catherine had observed him. Anxiety didn't grip him. Far away, he stood. Things deteriorated further in the palace. He acted out the part, smiling and following directions, yet it seemed robotic, as if he were only acting. Unlike the other kids, he didn't get up with the sun. At other times, he remained still. Plus, he made sure not to look any adult in the eye, particularly Camilla. Not in George, but in youngsters who were carrying more than they could express, Catherine noticed that kind of detachment. His expressionless, unfocused eyes and features brought a lump to her throat the second time she saw him outside the music room. A tender touch from her hand rested on his shoulder as she approached him. No flinching from him. She could sense the tension under his calm demeanor, not quite terror, but close, even though he hardly raised his head. This was more than just silence, it was covert action. She insisted he not carry it alone. Catherine swung around to face the music room while sliding her fingers down his back. She would discover the truth, regardless of what had transpired or what was being concealed. But how do you explain a mother who knows her child is in danger just by feeling it? Everything will change after what she finds out next, so be sure to keep watching. As soon as procedure was disregarded, the halls fell into a hushed stillness. That kind of silence that gave the impression that Catherine was walking faster than she actually was. With the assumption that no one would interrogate her, she informed a neighboring assistant that she had to see to the kids. Being involved with her children was more than simply a habit for Catherine, it was an instinct. At this particular moment, her entire being begged her to locate George. As she made her way to the east wing, the beams of sunshine streaming in through the tall windows warmed the walls, but did little to alleviate the unexpected cold that gripped her. Muted voices floated into the hall as she drew closer to the music room. She hesitated. Camilla was among them. The queen consort's voice had that subtle, well-honed edge that allowed her to gently but firmly admonish people without coming across as cruel. A moment for speaking and another for listening, she was telling George, "My darling. Our focus should not be on ourselves at all times." With her heart rate increasing, Catherine remained still just outside the partially open door. George then responded in a low voice. "Unsure. It seemed okay to me. I told him that you were really kind when he wanted to know what we do to support schools." Camilla interrupted too abruptly. However, it's wise to allow the grown-ups to lead the discussion at times. A sufficiently lengthy delay had passed. Into the house, Catherine stepped. With his hands clenched and a face that vacillated between bewilderment and shame, George stood close to the piano. Standing close by, Camilla sipped from a crystal glass while smiling slightly, as if she had practiced. Catherine silently moved over to George and put her hand on his back. Leaning in her direction, he revealed what he had been suppressing by tensing his shoulders. Looking over, Camilla spoke in a light voice. "We were merely conversing." His speech was lengthy. Everyone was asking him to share. He was forthright, and Catherine was steady and composed in her response. "That will not be shamed from me." An eyebrow was raised by Camilla. "It is possible for children to unknowingly step on someone's toes. Pay attention to it. Humility is a quality that they acquire." Unmoved, Catherine stared. "I will not tolerate my son being made to feel inferior just because he speaks out when spoken to. Confidence is inflated." George kept quiet, but he did look up at his mom. As she knelt beside him, she searched her face. "Were you ever worried that you had erred?" Quietly, she inquired. George waited a long time before offering the most subtle nod. Her jaw stiffened. Gradually getting to her feet, she turned to say goodbye to Camilla. While I do believe in the value of correction, I will not abide the demeaning treatment of children. George was led out of the room by her as she did not wait for a response. Her footsteps were stealthy, yet they were full of hope. The gentle murmur of voices and the sound of glasses clinking receded as they continued down the hall, although George's placid silence conveyed more than words could. The hidden reality, Prince George's lack of speech. George stood silently by Catherine's side, his gaze fixed on something between the present and the past. So yet, she hasn't asked anything. Rather, she ushered him into a spare, underutilized sitting room nestled in the east wing, a tranquil haven away from prying eyes. Inside, George settled into the plush seat beside the window and stared out at the gardens. Catherine sat down next to him, patiently waiting, not pushing, simply being there. The long period of quiet was finally broken by her gentle, comforting voice. "Are you interested in discussing it?" After a moment of thought, he gently nodded. "Should I ever become king, I mentioned something about supporting schools." It seemed like people laughed, but it was a good laugh. With her gaze unwavering, Catherine listened. However, he went on to say that Granny Camilla had warned him about acting too confidently, saying that adults dislike it when children behave too confident. He almost whispered his addition after pausing. "I sounded haughty," she remarked. The word hung in the atmosphere. With a delicate touch, Catherine covered his hand. "George, that was not hubris. Being truthful and compassionate was that. And for that, no one has the right to make you feel inadequate. Under no circumstances." "What do you believe caused Catherine to abruptly cease smiling and begin silently drawing lines?" To find out, continue watching. Princess Catherine's quiet line. Despite the pleasantries spoken in the palace reception hall, Catherine could feel the anxiety building up inside her. Focus, which she had become adept at evading in public, but which she would not disregard anymore. As a subtle crack was opening up within, the photographers outside were busy trying to get the ideal shot through the trellis. It was nothing new for Camilla. She often offered her typical subtle jabs, comments masquerading as tradition, given with the grace of wisdom but tinged with something far less charitable. But this time it was George, not Catherine, who was the target. And that was the turning point. Earlier in the day, following the youth round table, Camilla had reprimanded the boy in private, telling him not to be haughty and that overly talkative children were disliked by everyone. Catherine had understood without George's clarification. By herself, she managed to catch its tail end. It wasn't the words themselves that wounded her, it was the subsequent shame she witnessed in her son's eyes as he wondered if he had done anything wrong for expressing himself. As soon as the kids were in bed that night, Charlotte quietly humming, Louis clutching a toy knight, Catherine discovered William immersed in his briefing notes. She claimed, "It happened again," before sliding into the armchair without offering any explanation. She described George's emotions and what she had observed to him. William was startled as he felt a growing wrath well up in his face. "She manages to make it sound innocuous every time," Catherine whispered. "However, she is never kind to them." "I don't think so." William wanted to know if he needed to step in. With a shake of her head, Catherine was dismissive. "That is, until she repeats the action. Now since I'm not going to act, I just want her to know that I noticed." She simply set it down, steady and composed, without raising her voice or seeking approval. That serenity that is not a result of apathy but of conviction. Excusing it was enough for her. After a while, she lingered in the doorway for a second longer as she peered in on George sleeping soundly, finally settled. She had learned to bend over backwards from years of royal politeness, but tonight she had seen something very different. She would no longer stoop, instead, she would stand up for her children. The day the boundary was established, Catherine felt the stillness rumbling beneath her composure just as the discussion was coming to a close. She stayed in the room while William went to deal with press issues. Rooting herself and her son, she delicately curved her fingers around George's shoulder. On the other side, Camilla loosened a brooch while her voice exuded that certain something that belied its surface description. It fell silently and gently, yet it had an impact nonetheless. A comment on how self-assurance can easily lead to hubris, serving as a gentle warning to successors to listen more than to speak. Although George had nodded courteously, he appeared to have lost interest. Outside observers would have missed it. The photographers were getting ready for another stunning shot as they set up their equipment just beyond the garden trellis. The proper royal protocol was followed, smiles, handshakes, and all, but on the inside, something had changed. Why? Not only because of the words themselves, but also because of the audience. Charlotte hummed a melody she had heard at the event and filled the vehicle journey back with quiet conversation. As he reenacted made-up fights from the show, Louis held a small knight. George said nothing. Leaning on the glass, his stillness not melancholy but battered. Catherine was not demanding. She was processing, not pouting, when she saw that expression. William was still in the study, reading briefs, when she visited him later that evening, after the children had fallen asleep and the palace had returned to its usual quiet. He sensed a change the second she stepped foot in the room. "Does everything seem okay?" he inquired, laying his folder down. "No," she said without missing a beat. Without hesitating or skirting the subject, she spoke up. Again, Camilla took George aside and told him straight out that he talks too much and that other people find it annoying. William's brows furrowed gradually. "Who told you this, George?" "According to Catherine, I walked in right when she was about to finish." Later on, he admitted it, thinking he'd embarrassed us. For an instant, William remained silent. He merely rubbed his brow and exhaled slowly. "I will not abide by that." Catherine concurred that it is not. Not for the first time, either. Even they could tell it wasn't. The subtle insults couched in polite conversation, the remarks that would be taken for granted as innocuous if you weren't aware of how frequently they appeared. The volume is never too high to accuse, yet it's never too low to avoid attention. Catherine went on, maintaining a low but steady voice, saying that she is always measured with adults. However, George and the other children have never had that same level of attention from her. Despite William's promise to confront her, Catherine declined. "At this time, no. I would like it if she knew I heard it and saw it." She must realize that a boundary has been established. Perhaps anticipating greater fury or reluctance, he scrutinized her. Catherine, though, was not restrained in her demeanor. The calm that comes after years of remaining silent and letting things go for the purpose of peace is earned. William started to answer if she crossed it again. However, with a subtle assurance, Catherine interrupted him. "She refuses. Keep your voice down. Everything is calm. Only conclusion." With a silent stride, she retreated to the corridor where the kids were playing. The furrow in George's brow had disappeared, and he was sound asleep. Catherine stood for a second by the entrance before turning and leaving. With calm determination, rather than defeat. After Catherine's quiet shook the palace, what do you believe transpired next? Keep watching. This serenity was merely the first stage. Having had the good fortune to meet representatives from some truly remarkable American non-profits. Revolt of Princess Catherine in silence, the night had been exhausting. The children had fallen asleep by the time they got back to Adelaide Cottage, and the hallways were quiet under the lowered chandeliers. However, Catherine stayed alert, her mind not disturbed but focused. She did not meander around the rooms, her heels hardly making a sound. With the measured determination of an observer who has taken in enough. The decision had already been made when she halted by George's bedside, running a hand through his hair. Even in sleep, the wrinkle on his forehead hadn't smoothed out. Whatever had been communicated to him, along with the tone that had been attached to those words, continued to reverberate. The call started by morning. George will not be attending the forthcoming youth environmental display, he must first go to the royal office. While it's true that he had a somewhat raw throat, that wasn't the main cause. Catherine had no intention of submitting her son to another gathering planned by Camilla's inner circle, where coldness masquerading as kindness and subtle jabs passed for advice. She was no stranger to the subtle prodding that sapped self-assurance, the critical remarks disguised as praise, and the constant effort to maintain an upbeat demeanor. Naturally, word spread even more quickly than she ended the call. One of Camilla's assistants had already asked, unofficially, why George hadn't shown there by midday. Catherine failed to provide any explanation. Surrender to their curiosity. Later that night, as Catherine got ready for another engagement, she overheard a maid recounting Camilla's comment about George being too fragile for outside events. Catherine remained unfazed. "Thank you," she said. Gave a subtle nod and continued with her day as planned. However, something changed under her composure. Her voice remained low. She refrained from issuing a remark. Still, the palace walls appeared to realign as she drew a border that was so distinct and immovable. A difference became apparent in the days that ensued. Staff members began to speak with more measured tone. Rechecks were performed on all reports. A tone of caution pervaded the briefings. There had been no warning from Catherine. The red flag was her. Silently observing, William did not act indifferent but rather followed her guidance. He had remained silent that night at Highgrove, even though her voice had broken the stillness like glass. "My deep and lasting love for it stems from the fact that I get to see its daily existence." Quietness, not oratory, was his strength. He then proceeded to declare, "You were right to say it," when they revisited the moment many days later. Her silence was deafening. She could have skipped it. The following morning, her position was truly tested. Without the subtle hesitancy that had crept in, George straightened up, joked more freely with Charlotte, and carried himself with more confidence. That was the critical factor. The need for a steady equilibrium in royal life was something Catherine had known for a long time. A person's outward appearance was important. Keeping quiet was a tactic on occasion. But being a mother required something more profound. Standing strong when others smiled and protecting gracelessly were prerequisites. In the absence of show. At last, everyone understood. She wasn't trying to hide her identity. Her child was being protected by her. A place of serenity at Balmoral. Balmoral had an air of seclusion from the start. The royal family enjoyed rolling hills, muddy boots, and private moments away from prying eyes. To Charles, it was priceless. However, a subtle tension pervaded the air this summer. Only under one condition had Catherine consented to attend. No matter how brief, George must never be left alone. William and Catherine were the first to arrive. Camilla arrived later, looking lovely in her trademark pearls and as charming as usual. Even though she grinned frequently, her interactions with Catherine were icy and unintense. Still, George appeared to flourish at Balmoral, where he chased squirrels, climbed trees, and asked incessant questions about insects and birds. Kept her distance, letting a glimmer of optimism slip her mind. William and Charles went fishing on the afternoon of the 5th. While Lady Celeste was out, Catherine remained indoors and read her letters. To her, it seemed like the kids were playing in the garden. Something inside of her froze as a footman casually brought up the fact that Prince George was in the sunroom with Her Majesty. She rose to her feet, nodded courteously, and silently strolled away. She halted outside the sunroom. Gentle yet ragged, Camilla's voice floated through the slightly open door. "George, inquisitiveness is a beautiful thing, but kings to come must realize that not everyone values their opinions. Please understand that I am merely attempting to be of assistance, my love. Every once in a while, Mommy forgets to be proper." With a shove, Catherine opened the door. With a blink, Camilla pivoted. "It never occurred to me that you were I was looking for George," she said softly. The boy stood by the window, eyes low. "Well, you found him," Camilla replied with a brittle smile. "I have." Catherine crossed the room and placed a hand gently on George's shoulder. "Could you check on Charlotte and Louis for me?" He nodded and slipped out, silent. As the door clicked shut, Catherine turned. Her voice was calm but firm. "You may not agree with my parenting. But don't ever speak to my son about what I've forgotten. It's over. Do not take this as an attack." She stated it without blushing. "This is where it ends." Camilla remained silent. A tiny nod was given by Catherine. Nothing beats being kind. Distance will suffice if that is excessive. Quietly yet decisively, she departed thereafter. At that instant, Balmoral took on a new cadence. Even after lunch, Camilla was still smiling and making ideas for the garden. She ceased providing guidance, stopped correcting, and, most significantly, never again found herself alone with George. A distinct story was told in the family photos taken at the conclusion of summer, showing unity with polished smiles on the castle stairs and matching tartan. Yet on the inside, the boundaries had changed. Returning to Adelaide Cottage, George discreetly entered his mother's bedroom at a later time. Was what I just said incorrect? Curling up alongside her, he inquired. She barely encircled him with an arm. As she softly brushed his hair back, he raised an eyebrow and said, "You stood up for me." She grinned. "At all times, I will. What does it signify, though, when Catherine goes against royal custom to protect her son's dignity? Please share your opinions with us. Please subscribe, like, and comment.